Bella.
Hi, Irina.
Welcome back to the studio.
Thank you.
How you doing?
Good. Do we want to touch base on the mistake that happened last episode?
We do, and it's funny, nobody said anything yet, so I don't know if anybody caught it, but I caught it, or actually you caught it, and then you told me about it, but I've listened to what we recorded a few times, and then I listened to the episode, and then until you called me and told me what the mistake was, I didn't know what it was. So what the mistake was, in the previous episode on period and breaking the stigma of menstruation and period, we talk about birth control, and Isabella asked me if I use any, and we started talking about IUD, which I do have. And she asked me which kind I have, and she said, is it Moderna? And I said, yes, it's Moderna, not realizing that Moderna is COVID vaccine, which I also have, but not in my hoo-ha. There I have Mirena, so we just wanted to clear that up because it didn't catch my eye until Isabella pointed that out. So thanks for catching my mistake.
I wanted to read a story relating to our last episode about periods and menstruation that somebody shared with me. So this is what they said. I feel like there is such a lack of education for young women. I started birth control in high school because that's what was normal, and then didn't have a full period for 6+ years. I was literally in my mid-20s before I started to truly learn about my cycle, and that there was only 5 to 7 days per month that you can actually get pregnant. I'm wondering if others had similar experiences. I'm all for universal access to birth control, but also hoping that girls and young women are educated more on menstruation and women's health. And educating men would help too.
This is such an interesting story because I am sure that there are a lot of women that can relate. Like she said, I'm wondering if other can relate, and I'm sure, because we also touched so much on how there was, and I think there still is, lack of education in school on birth control, on sex ed and all of that, and in some states it's not even.
Yeah. And women aren't truly taught how many days a month they can get pregnant, and they're just thrown on birth control. Here's some food for thought. Men can impregnate like hundreds, thousands of women in 9 months, where women can only get pregnant once in 9 months. So why are women on birth control when men should be the ones on birth control?
Because we carry the weight of the world. That's why.
That is very true. With that being said, if you want to learn more about this topic, you can go listen to our other podcast, episode number 3.
Today we have a special episode because we have a guest on. It's a first interview. And I am especially very excited about this. And I wanted to introduce this fabulous guest. He is an amazing educator, a wonderful creator. He is an amazing father, husband, brother, and a son. And I am happy to be married to him. So please welcome Roy Lee Barnett Jr.
So Roy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so Roy here. I grew up in North Tulsa, Oklahoma. So my family's been in Oklahoma since the 1800s when Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act. So I'm Afro-Indigenous. My tribe is Choctaw. And so my family has been in Oklahoma for a long time, and so I feel like Oklahoma is part of my blood, and I'm definitely proud to be from there.
How would you say being from Oklahoma shaped you who you are today?
Like I said, it absolutely shaped who I am. I think that having the heritage that I have and the way that I grew up, particularly in the South, really shaped how I view the world, how I see the world. My mama was an educator for over 42 years. Both my parents were artists. Music goes back in my family for generations as well. And so for me, being a creative is such a massive aspect of my life, and it always has been, to the point that, I don't do it because I want to. I absolutely have a need to create and do things. And it's always been that way. Other things, being from the South, just that kind of, Southern hospitality and being raised to treat people well, but also recognizing, the racism of the South. But it's important to note that people think that just the South is racist, but in reality, the North is just as racist in a lot of regards, and in some cases, a lot worse. But I definitely think that all of those things had and continue to have such a massive impact on who I am as a person.
So I know you mentioned that things are very different from the North and the South. What are some of the biggest differences you've noticed from living in Oklahoma to now living in Colorado?
Honestly, and I think it's important to, particularly now, always be honest and live your truth. And to be quite blunt, I don't particularly care for how people are here. When I first moved here, you tell people you're living in Colorado, and they're like, all people there are so nice, but that's not been my experience. And of course, that's not always going to be the case. I've met some phenomenal people here, but generally, and I think partially COVID exacerbated, excuse me. But I think COVID really made all of these things worse because social interaction is like any kind of muscle or training. And so I think a lot of people have that interaction between people has really atrophied. And, we went to Oklahoma a couple of weeks ago, and it just feels good to be back in a place, simple things like holding the door for somebody, saying hello, thank you, those kind of things. Whereas here, it just feels like it's just so centered in the meisms that it just is quite bothersome to me.
Do you have any stories of a time in Colorado where you thought people were going to be nicer and then they turned out not the way you were expecting?
Yeah, so I moved here in 2009 for grad school, and I'd been lucky that I've been able to travel to different places, studied abroad in Japan and whatnot, and just generally, my experience has been, even if I don't know another person's language, we're breaking bread somewhere, you know what I'm saying? So like, that's kind of been my experience. And so when I first moved here, it was such a weird feeling. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was like, why is it so hard to just break bread with people, to make friends and meet people? And since then, I've learned that that's kind of, and in some circles, it's hard to break in because people are very cliquish, can be. And again, this is when I first moved here, being younger and whatnot. I think that as you get older, you really settle down in who you are and what matters to you, and like those things don't matter to me anymore. I have my friends, and you know what I'm saying, and so like that's what's important. Like one of my really good friends was probably her and her now ex-husband were the first two people that I met, and we're still really good friends. And so I can't say that everybody here is that way. And again, lots of people are moving here, but I want to point out that people will often say, it's the transplants, it's the people that are moving here, and it's just not that case. Some of them suck, but some of the people that call themselves natives here suck, which, as an indigenous person, is problematic to me when I see these people having, native stickers on, and they're the furthest thing from, the natives of this land. And so I think that, it's just a weird kind of thing to me.
Roy, can you talk a little bit about moving to Japan, and specifically what drew you to move to Japan, and just why you have such a love for that country and that culture?
Yeah, people always ask me that question, and I don't necessarily have an answer, but since I was, a little kid, I've always just been fascinated by Japan. Literally, I think that watching, because I used to love, PBS and watch to Reading Rainbow and Sesame Street, and I remember LeVar Burton going to Japan, or Sesame Street, Big Bird goes to Japan. So seeing those things, I think, had an influence on me. in elementary school. I don't remember why, but we had these Japanese visitors come, and just those kind of things. I just think just left such a huge impact on me that I always wanted to go. And so when I got into Oklahoma State University, one of the first things I did is go down to the study abroad office. And I was down there almost every day and became really good friends with the people that worked there and the director of the department. Actually, one of the workers that used to work there, I'm still really good friends with, but that's where I met him at. And it took me 3 years of going down there to finally, muster up the strength. Because, I'd never been on an airplane before, never really, outside of band trips, traveled outside of Oklahoma. And so I just said, one day, just let me fill this stuff out and see what happens. And got accepted, and it was kind of, shocking at first. Like, literally, my very first airplane ride was to go to Japan. So from Tulsa to LA, from LA to Osaka, Japan. And so it was I was lucky in the sense that not many people get to experience or live a dream that they have. And so to this day, I realize and understand how lucky I am. But the culture and the place is just, it really changed the trajectory of my life. So I know for a fact I wouldn't be in Colorado. I wouldn't be doing the things that I'm doing now had I not gone to Japan.
Before I ask you the next question, you know what I just realized? That you and I have that thing in common to where it was a first flight in our late 20s or in our early 20s to where you went to Japan and I came to US.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that?
No. Or maybe I did and just forgot.
So hashtag we are learning some new things in this episode about
Hashtag meant to be.
hashtag meant to be.
Like,
But-
I don't even know how old you are when you were born. That's what marriage is about.
Right. Anyway, going back to Japan,
I'm kidding.
can you tell me how, specifically, what lessons you learned from Japan, and also how did Japan shape you as an artist and creative?
So Japan is just one of the most beautiful places on the earth. And something that's really great about it is literally every season has a festival for it. And it's just such an amazing thing to see, that connection to nature and just the different aspects of that. So this was back in 03, 04, so I didn't even have a digital camera. But, I've always taken pictures. I can remember being a little kid and going with my mama to like the thrift store and looking at the little zoom cameras or whatever. But I never, really considered myself a photographer. It's just like everybody, you take pictures. But when I was in Japan, I would go to this giant electronics store called Yodobashi Camera in Umeda, which is in kind of like downtown Osaka, if you could think about it that way. And on one aisle, at the very top, one of the top floors, was all of the Kodak film you could imagine, and the other aisle was all the Fuji film. And I was just like a kid in a candy store and would just pick all the different films, not knowing what they were and just experimenting. And so in that regard, Japan turned me into a photographer because it really made me want to understand, taking pictures and whatnot. Like I said, I've always been an artist, been a musician forever, writer, all those kind of things. And so Japan really opened up that aspect of me.
He's definitely a photographer. Every time I come over, he has a camera in his hand and he's taking pictures of
He's taking pictures,
kids,
he's taking
me,
videos.
Didn't you say your cousin gets nervous sometimes?
Yeah, so my cousin used to live with us for a little bit, and I remember her first few days, because we are so used to him having all this equipment around and just taking pictures, and even the kids, they are so used to it. They don't pose. It's just
Yeah, you're just
they
living
just
life.
know that's what Daddy does. And so I was talking to my cousin, and Roy came and started, taking pictures. And again, I see him, but I don't see necessarily
You're just
what
used to
he's
it.
doing, right? And my cousin starts smiling, and I'm looking at her kind of like, why? She's like, doesn't it make you nervous that he always taking? I was like, I don't even see that anymore. That he's taking pictures of you or his video doesn't make you nervous. And I said no, because that's what he always does. Roy, I wanted to go back to Japan a little bit more and just in comparison Japan and US, and for you navigating world as a black man, where do you feel or where did you feel more comfortable, in Japan or in US?
It's a complicated question. However, at the time, and I sometimes will watch this YouTube channel where it's this black dude living in Asia, and he'll interview blacks living in different parts of Asia, and I was like almost shocked that almost verbatim every single one of them said the same thing that I said. In that, for the very first time in my life, I felt free. And you don't realize that you're not free when you're raised here because it's just your norm. But when you go somewhere else where you can truly just be yourself and just be free, and and it's weird to say that because Japan is 96%, something like that, Japanese, and so people see you, but it's not like here. And so being in Japan was the first time that I felt free, and I didn't even really realize it until me and some friends went to Okinawa for spring break. And there's a lot of military bases down there, and it wasn't until I saw like American military people, looking at you and whatever, that I felt my American shield come back up. And I had let that down and I didn't even realize it, but I felt that and I was like, damn, like I hadn't had to have that, since I've been here. And so, because, the international students, most of the people you meet are students, and most of the people are, pretty excited about being in Japan and everything. And so, and again, I don't want to say that, people are perfect, because people are people. That's one of the biggest lessons I learned in Japan. You might have, it's like a recipe, you know what I'm saying? So like one recipe might call for more of a certain kind of spice, one might call for less. And that's what I kind of figured culture to be like. And so in one place, people have more kindness or niceness or whatever. In another place, people might have something different. But I just never, and you can't ever forget that taste of completely being free, completely feeling safe. And I think that was the biggest thing, is nowhere in America do you feel safe as a black man. Whereas in Japan, I never felt in danger from, the police or anybody at all in general.
Do you feel comfortable sharing experiences or experience that from US to where there was a time where you didn't feel safe?
I mean, yeah, I think one of my first experiences with police brutality. So, again, I love being from Tulsa, but that doesn't mean that you love everything about a place. So, like, one of my first experiences with like police brutality, and I always just remember it. And I was talking to my mom a couple of years ago, and she had pointed out some things about it that I'd forgotten, because I was maybe somewhere in elementary school, but we had just gotten a Lincoln Town car. This is the 80s, which is a nice car, and so what they do in Tulsa is the police will follow you and until you make a mistake or just pull you over for whatever, and so they pulled us over. And of course, my mama saw him, so she stopped at a stop sign, and he came up and said she didn't stop, and they just had their shotguns out on us for something like a not stopping at a stop sign, as they said, but again, looking for drugs, that kind of stuff. And so I just remember being really, really scared. And again, you're a little kid, but so like Tulsa's, segregated, and so North Tulsa is where primarily blacks live, and I just always remember this, like, seeing the helicopters at night, hearing like police chasing people, and just like I just remember one night they'd chase somebody behind our house, and I just remember the cop and just how he was talking to the dude and just cussing at him and just awful, just violent, And so it's always kind of interesting to me when people talk about any aspect of hoodness in Colorado. And it's just like, man, y'all don't even know. This is my son, Roy the Fifth.
Hi.
So when you say Roy the Fifth, does that mean how many
Daddy.
generations?
5. So he is the 5th. I'm actually the 4th. So yeah, and again, I'm in my 40s, and so how there was just a general disregard for blacks, as there continues to be, but especially as my daddy, his daddy, and his daddy's daddy, and so the numbering was incorrect, and so even though my daddy was a 3rd, he was listed as nothing, so that's why legally I'm a junior, but in actuality I'm a 4th, and so with my son I wanted to correct it, so he's Roy the 5th. So like I said, my family's been in Oklahoma for a very long time, and my son is the first Roy born outside of Oklahoma since the 1800s.
Wonderful. A beautiful, handsome baby boy. I wanted to go back to something that you said when it comes to police brutality being, and just for you being scared. Well, first of all, that just an awful for a kid to have to see your mom or your parents. Was with both of your mom and dad, or just your mom in the car?
It was my mama, me, and my oldest sister, so she was freaking out in the back too, and it was just one of those experiences you always kind of remember.
Just awful to be like little kid seeing police coming, having their hands on their guns, just ready to shoot for any wrong move you make. And that what makes me so angry right now, where the history that they trying to not to do, but they trying to rewrite and retell, and at the end of the day try to make white people comfortable and say the most stupidest things that are coming out now of Florida and of a bunch of other states. I don't know, it just always just makes me really angry. But for you as an educator, Roy, and Roy is just an amazing educator, and I am lucky also to be not working, but I volunteer at his school, and just to see how much students love him, and he's creating all these amazing programs. But as an educator, how do you feel about the state of education right now with all of this craziness that is coming out about rewriting the history?
On one hand, you could say that, it's terrible, but the reality is it's always been terrible. There's never been a moment in the history of the country where there's been an honest examination of its past cruelty, of its past exploitation, none of those things. And so I don't ever want to. It's funny because I talk a lot about. I'm very opinionated. Some people say political, but I don't think it's political to want kids not to starve to death, and everybody to be able to not just have their very basic needs met, but to enjoy being on this earth. And so even though, like, I was doing a photo shoot the other day, and they were kind of talking about I feel bad about bringing kids into this earth. And I was like, I don't feel that way. It's going to be tough, but you have to raise soldiers and prepare for what it actually is. But those are the people that are going to change things. And so you have to point out and look at these things, because if you don't know what the disease is, it's hard to tackle it. And I think one of the good things from COVID, from the George Floyd protests, is a lot of people, and by that I mean whites, were able to truly see what we have already known and always known. It's kind of like when Trump was elected. I was not surprised at all. And you ask a lot of black people, and it's just like, yeah, yeah. And like so many people were just like shocked, and it's like, where have you been? We've been. This is what it's been since long before I was alive. Like, you should hear some of the stories I've heard from my parents, my grandpa, like it's like, where have you been? It's like, people don't believe you until they see, on camera somebody being murdered, by these people that who we pay their salaries through our taxes that are supposed to serve and protect. And and again, um, I don't want to say that all police or whatever, but it's kind of like I don't have time to try to figure out if this snake is poisonous or not. Sometimes it's just like I'm in survival mode, you know what I'm saying? So like, I don't trust you until I kind of have a reason to when it comes to those kind of things.
I think what interesting you said that happened with Trump election and what happened when George Floyd was murdered is that talking about white privilege, right? A lot of people, a lot of white people were surprised because we had the privilege not to see those things. We don't experience them. And not necessarily not saying that, all white people are racist, but some, you can be very liberal, very progressive, very all this and that and the other, but still you don't experience what people of color are experiencing. So that's the privilege that we have, and then which people I think don't understand, to where white privilege, with the privilege, it's not necessarily because you're coming from rich family, right? White privilege is that we look white and we have certain things to where you go and deal with police or deal with any law enforcement, to where when I am stopped, I'm not scared for my life. I'm like, oh man, I'm speeding, I might pay a ticket or whatever that may be. But as Roy said, experience, and I know for a fact that is not the only experience he had, to where he doesn't know if he's gonna come out of that interaction.
I just want to also point out, and again, to reiterate, privilege has nothing to do with monies or financial. That's not what people are talking about. Everybody goes through different things, but privilege is simply the reason that you're going through something is not because of the color of your skin, versus some of the things that we have to go through is because of the color of our skin. That doesn't mean that you don't go through horrible things. That doesn't mean you don't, it's poverty and whatever. And the reality is, in our system of the United States, a lot of things are meant to separate us. And privilege is one of those things, so.
I know you talked about going to Japan and visiting places, and I know you've been to Ukraine as well, which is where Irina's from. How would you say your experience was in Ukraine?
I would say that Irina and her family are great, they're fine. But outside of that, it is not very welcoming, I felt, to blacks. And again, there can be different reasons for that, but at the same time, it's like, I just think you get to a point in your life where you're like, I'm not really interested in why you're racist. I just know that you are, and I ain't got time for that shit. And so, the first time, and again, like everything, that's not everybody. There's some like dope people and shit like that. But you definitely, because as a black person, you're raised in a white supremacist environment, and so you see and recognize everything instantly. Like, I know there were times when I would see things that Irina didn't know how to see at the time. So you are blinded. Whiteness is a certain kind of blindness. But for us, we have to always be aware. And again, if you bring it back here to the different, health issues in the black community, if you're under constant stress every single day, then of course you're going to have issues. Of course you're going to have high blood pressure and all these different things, because our stresses, our mental health aren't things that are taken seriously. If you look at the medical field, they literally and doctors to this day still believe that blacks don't feel pain at the rate of whites. And so, in like getting treatment is much more difficult for us because they don't believe us, and those kind of things. And so, being in Ukraine, it just, like, to be honest, it's not my favorite place to be for myself as far as feeling comfortable and welcomed. It doesn't feel as dangerous as here, but I definitely, I recognize the neo-Nazi symbolism, the graffiti, and like the different neo-Nazi groups, and so that's a huge problem that I think Ukraine at some point is going to have a reckoning with. Particularly right now, just the amount of Nazis fighting, you know, in the war with Russia. And it's also really interesting seeing how Western media tries to, whitewash that aspect. You got to look at things as they are in reality. A lot of these fighters that people are praising are just covered in that Nazi tattoos and Nazi regalia. And again, of course, it's not everybody. The president of Ukraine is Jewish, and so, but it's something that has to be recognized. Nationalism anywhere is not a good thing. Here, there, anywhere else.
Something I want to add to that, I am from Ukraine, obviously, and I'm very proud to be from Ukraine. Ukraine made me who I am, but it's not perfect. Ukraine is not perfect, and what Roy said is valid. Ukraine is very white country. Majority of people look like me. And I mentioned in a first episode to where, I didn't see anybody different than me until I actually came to US. But there's a lot of racism here. I mean, well, here, yeah, but in Ukraine, but also I feel like when people from Eastern Europe move here, they bring that here with them. And even as immigrants, people who come here as immigrants who are white, again, feel like that they have more rights to be here as even Roy, who is an American, or any other immigrant who comes from countries in Africa and in Middle East who are black and brown. And I remember hearing this man once said, he was either from Russia or Ukraine, I can't remember, and he said, I can't even go to Walmart because all this blacks walking around there. And I remember I got so mad and I said, what, like, I was like, you are here as an immigrant, right? You are here taking advantage of all the privileges that some of Americans don't have. How dare you say that? So again, I love Ukraine. I always will love Ukraine, but it's just the fact that some people have that racism in them, that's for sure.
Kind of, sorry, go ahead.
And even the ones that are quote unquote illegal immigrants somehow think that they are not, and will point to the quote unquote illegal immigrants that are Hispanic or Mexican, which I should point out are actually the indigenous people of this land. So I think language is important, and so I don't refer to Mexicans as immigrants, because how can you immigrate to a land that was stolen from you?
No, I think that's a fascinating point. I remember I did a trip to Arizona, and we got to see the people migrating over, and we referred them as migrants, which I think is a better term, because how can you be illegal on a land that was rightfully yours? But I know we were just talking and you said something about how in Ukraine you noticed things that Irina didn't notice because of, who you are. Was there any specific moments in Ukraine where something happened that maybe Irina overlooked but you were aware of because you have to be?
Oh yeah, I remember the first time we took my daughter. She was like 2 or so, and just the looks.
She was 9 months.
9 months. Oh damn. 9 months. My timing, and something that happens to you when. So my dad passed away in 2018, which you're never able, you don't recover from those things. And so my sense of time is gone. And so, logically I know the exact date and year, but I don't. And so my time is gone now. But anyway, we were walking around with my daughter and just the constant looks and stare. And it's one thing, you know how I know how to translate, because as a black person, you have to be able to translate your environment into danger or not. And so it's one thing if people are looking at you, but it's how people are looking at you. And I just can never forget how they were looking at us and looking at my daughter, and it made me want to just fight motherfuckers. So I think that was something that I really didn't see at first. But like I said, some people you can just see they're just looking, just trying to check you out. That's one thing, you know what I'm saying? But like the people that had like looks of disgust on their face, like it's just something you don't forget. And so.
But I mean, our daughter is so cute, and I even remember at the airport. Do you remember at the airport when we were flying from New York to Ukraine? How people were also, because when you get to New York to Ukrainian Airlines, it's just there might be one or two Americans because it's a straight flight to Ukraine. So even people were giving us this look that, and I think I wanted to correct Roy a little bit. So we went to Ukraine twice. Once when we just got married, and then another time we went when we had a daughter. So I wasn't aware of things when we went for the first time. And I remember Roy would point out some graffitis that he saw with, N-words written and all of the other disgusting things. The second time I was much more aware, and I'm not saying I saw everything he did and all the looks and everything, but the second time I was much more aware because I think because of a daughter.
Yeah. Irina, I wanted to ask you, have you experienced any backlash from being in an interracial marriage from your Ukrainian community?
Yeah, I did. So back when I moved to Denver, before I knew Roy, I found Ukrainian community and I was spending a lot of time with them. And even when I was already with Roy, we would go to, different events, and I would help to even plan some events.
In the U.S., right?
It's in the U.S. here in Denver. There's Ukrainian organization called Ukrainians of Colorado, which a lot of people are part of that organization, and they put a lot of events together. But I remember, so during COVID time, during COVID time when the murder of George Floyd happened, and again, like Roy said, because it was COVID, so everybody was on their phone, right? And everybody saw that horrific thing would happen. And I've always been very vocal, I would say, on social media. I post a lot of things that maybe some people don't like, but I don't care about that. And I was posting a lot of things about and saying a lot of things about what was happening, about all of the protest. And I remember this woman, I'm not going to say her name, she tagged me, I think that's what's called on Facebook, right? You can tag somebody, like somebody's name, right? She tagged me in this post, and I don't remember exactly what the post said, but she said some people blindfoldedly following Black Lives Matter protest and basically not knowing that is like, it was not like that is a terrorist organization, but that they are all victims, right? And then she tagged me. So because, it's COVID, so you don't really see anybody. So I wrote her back, I was like, please don't tag me in your racist post. Something like that. So then she wrote back, and it's like all on Facebook, and it's not even like, DM or private messages. It's all right there to see.
Oh, in the comment section?
In a comment section. So then she wrote back how she said, you used to be different, you used to be better, but now you've changed, you following Black Lives Matter, and what are you gonna do? So we have 2 kids, right? And so she said, what are you gonna do when that, so I think she was saying it in Ukrainian, I can't remember, but basically she said, how are you gonna protect your white kids from those people, meaning black, I know what she meant, from those people when they come to take your kids away? So I don't like. You can say
Does she not know that your kids are mixed?
She's just racist. That's what she is.
Racists aren't smart.
Exactly. But what you can say shit about me all day and all night, but if you fucking touch my kids, there is the animal that wakes up inside of me. And I said, I used to work with her, and I've heard her say a lot of, I'm not even gonna repeat here, because she said very racist and horrible things, and that's kind of how I start distancing myself from her. But I said, I replied to that, to that comment about, somebody, whoever is coming for my kids. I said, don't you ever talk about my kids. And I said, I've heard you say a lot of racist things, but this is absolutely the most horrible thing that I've heard you say.
Yeah.
Because first of all, my kids are not white, my kids are mixed, right? And you really have to be a really, really fucking horrible racist to see somebody being killed by the police for 8 minutes or however long that 8 and,
Yeah.
And for you to say that because she said a lot of things, she said that he deserved to die.
Oh.
If you as a human being, and I don't care who you vote for, what's your color of the skin, as a human, because at the end of the day, we're all human. If you look at that and you say that was okay and he deserved to die, you are not a human to me. You are not a human. And again, if you fucking touch my kids, luckily I haven't seen that woman since then, and I don't want to see her because I don't want to be part of her. I don't want to have nothing to do with her. And it's still to this day, it's been almost 3 years since she said that, but every time I talk about this, it makes me so upset.
Yeah. Did Roy ever go with you to any of these events?
Roy, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I used to.
Did you ever feel uncomfortable?
You would have conversations with some people, and it's just like, you're having a conversation, you're fine, you're talking, and then it's just like this, almost like a classic formula where everything is cool. They think you're quote unquote one of the good ones just because you're talking to them, and then they'll bring up some racist shit. And you're like, oh, fuck you. Go fuck yourself. And you just move on. And so like a lot of that kind of shit, and it's just, I don't feel bad about not associating with them at all. And again, that's not to say, because some of them were, again, dope people, and some were dirtbags, and that's, the standard for everywhere. But yeah, I have my internal struggles about that, and I always will, because, I'm a black man, and so like when Russia invaded Ukraine and everyone was trying to get out, you feel bad, but then you see like these Ukrainians pull in like the African and black and non-white people off the train, or telling them to get to the back, and it's like, even in war, when y'all are trying to escape for your lives, you still have time to be racist. Like, goddamn. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, I have a conflicted relationship with the country of my wife's birth.
Yeah. Again, both things can be true. I love Ukraine, and I have obviously very different relationship with Ukraine than my husband does. But again, as I get older, as I evolve through my marriage, I've learned so much about the world, about myself, about some of my things that I used to think. But, again, as you evolve, as you learn, as you educate yourself, you try to become a better human. I don't know, but it's yeah.
And I think it's important too, like, something that racist dirtbags here will say is like, love it or leave it. But it's like, if my house is on fire, I'm not just gonna go stay, well, fuck it. I'm gonna try to put it out. It's like, if you see something horrible in your home, you fix it. And so it's not love it or leave it. Like, first off, this is my country. Like, my African ancestors have been here since the 1500s. My native indigenous ancestors have been here for thousands and thousands of years. Like, this is mine. So I'm going to try to fix it. So if I see something bad, if I see all this horribleness, I'm not going to leave. I'm fixing it. And that's why I work in education. Like, I think it's important. I think it's important that we are in service to humanity. And it's so funny to me how that ideal, that sentiment, is seen as some like extremist political stance when it's just like, no, I'm basically doing the things that you claim to do. Like, in this, not the truth of the things like the Constitution, because the Constitution was signed on the backs of millions of enslaved people. So you can't have a freedom document when people are enslaved. And, with the natives being, as we know, their land stolen. But the spirit of the thing is that all people are equal and free. So I'm trying to live up to that. Same thing with the U.S. ideal of Christianity. Like, these people are claiming to be followers of Yeshua when they are doing the exact opposite. So literally, like, I am going to always support oppressed people wherever they may be, whether it's here, whether it's Palestine, like whether it's South Africa, like wherever. And so to me, that is following that truth. So.
And being a good human, because like I said, at the end of the day, we are a human race, and we should help each other. We should help each other. If you have a better platform, a better resources, help the one they don't. Help the one they don't, because I don't know, I want a better world for my kids. And what Roy, doing in education, what we all are trying to do is to make things better, so the next generation don't have to go and fight and protest. Because when we look at any of the protests, either that's Black Lives Matter or women protesting, right? We see this old 95-year-old women or old people, depending on what protests are you in, right? Saying, I thought I don't have to protest anymore, and still here we are, and still here we are. Yes, things change, but yet they still the same, and yet in some cases they are worse. So just be a good human. Be a good human and help another person with whatever they don't have, if you have more.
What is that one quote where it's like, if some of us aren't free, then none of us are free?
And none of us are free.
Yeah.
I also want to say, like, and it's hard to rationalize this. Blacks tend to understand, but in a way, Southern racism is easier, not the outright extreme, like physical danger stuff, but it's easier to navigate and feels better than this, like, liberal racism, the performative stuff. Because the Southern stuff, is in your face, you navigate it. You might work with a dude that's racist, but y'all, you know where both of you stand, and you might even go to lunch together. It's just something, it's just different. Versus here, it's these people, the paternalization, like I love the blacks, and, my kids are black, and this and that, and it's like, I don't mean shit. And you especially see it in the schools here. But the question is, you ask yourself, why is it so difficult to keep black educators? And a lot of it is that, I have so much experience with, like, liberal saviors, white saviors, and just how bad that is for our black and brown kids, and even poor white kids, and so I don't want to ever make it seem like, here is perfect and rainbows and shit, because, you can have all these houses with Black Lives Matter signs and, like, in this house sign. Meanwhile, you've pushed out all the black and brown people, and if anybody wants to provide housing for the quote-unquote undesirables, then you're the first one out there, protesting because you don't want to drive down the market value of your houses when you were the ones that came into these previously black and brown communities and took over everything. And again, like, of course, that I would much rather see that shit than like a Confederate flag. But it's just like, well, at least I know where that dude stands. But also, fuck that dude, you know? And so, like I said, it's just the complexities of living in this country. That's why a lot of times you feel like you're crazy, but it's not accidental. All this like gaslighting, all this shit is like been planned out for a very long time.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I was wondering if you two had any advice for another interracial couple.
I think it's so unique person by person. I would just say that you marry who you marry, you fall in love with who you fall in love with, but don't ever diminish your own culture for that. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've seen, like, on various platforms, the social medias, where, you know, a black dude will marry a white woman and say something disparaging about black women and why, and I only date, you know, white women. And that shit's like disgusting to me, because black women are the mothers of all, you know. Black women are responsible for this country, for just about everything in the world, and so never ever disparage black women. And in the same token, if somebody doesn't like your interracial marriage, like, I don't give a shit about that either. Like, you know, don't give a fuck about what somebody that's not part of you cares.
You don't owe anybody any explanation. You marry who you marry, you create your family, and you love with that person, and what somebody thinks of you is none of your business. But also another thing that I want to add, educate yourself on the culture, on the customs and tradition of the person you marry, because that's important to know, because you blending two families, and especially if you're not even from US, you blend into different cultures. But even if you are from US, if you white and marrying somebody who is black or indigenous or Hispanic, you blend into different cultures. So make sure that you educate yourself on that as well.
All right, and last question. How did this love story start?
Like I said, it's difficult to meet people in Denver. Denver is not a great place for singles, and so did the online dating thing, and we met that way.
We met on Match.com, and we fall in love instantly.
Nah, she was like looking at me with a side eye the whole time, but we were sitting and talking for a while, and she eventually warmed up. But at first, it was just like, damn. All right.
And we became as friends, which is another advice I want to give to people who started dating. Become friends with somebody. And I am sure that online dating now, it's very different than what it was almost, 11 years ago. But become friends with somebody, really get to know that person before you get into romantic relationship, because that helps build the healthy foundation for your relationship.
And on that romantic note, thank you, Roy, for being on the podcast and helping us.
Thanks, Bella, for asking all these questions, but more importantly, thank you, Roy, for being on this podcast and sharing your stories and sharing your different experiences with us. And also, thank you for being our editor and engineer for free. I know you love doing that, right?
It takes a lot of time.
I know. But it does take...
But it's fine, just helping out, supporting y'all.
You are on social media, so where people can follow you. Roy is an amazing photographer, videographer, educator, creator. He's so many things, but where people can follow you?
You can check out my website, royleeb.com, ROYLEEB. And on the Instagram, it is Roy Lee B Photo. I'm on there. Social media is kind of stupid, but, you know, whatever.
We will provide his links in the description too. You can follow us with the handle Moments That Define Us on Instagram, TikTok.
You're doing this.
And you can also write your story to our email, momentsthatdefineus@gmail.com.
And on this note, thank you all for listening. Until next time, I'm Isabella.
And I'm Irina.
Bye, Roy.
Bye, everyone.
So cute.